Okie dokie. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the 18th meeting of Community Observations. If this is your first time joining us, welcome. We are a community for community operations people. Cassie and I started this almost 2 years ago now, and really just hoping to, bring other operationally and communitily minded people together and talk about best practices, share stories, and network and connect with one another. So today's meeting is going to be on managing vendor relationships. We have an amazing guest speaker with us, Joe, who's from the Amplitude customer success team, here to chat with us, as well as Cassie and I have some stories to share about managing vendor relationships as well. Just a quick intro on the two of us. If you haven't met us yet, I'm Tiffany. I am the COO at Talkbase. We are a startup looking to build a platform for community operations. My recent love lately, I've been playing a lot of Harry Potter Legacy on the PS5, and it's been consuming all of my time that I'm not working. And then currently I am working on a CSAT process and implementation for our customer success. Cassie.
Yes, thank you. I am Cassie. I am located in Austin, Texas, and I've been at Atlassian about 5 years now, and I focus on or lead our community operations team. I love the springtime. Like I said, I'm in Austin, so it is getting warmer. Right now it's like 77. It's just nice and sunny. So it feels like I'm like coming back alive. But my current ops projects, we are transitioning swag vendors. And so this new vendor that we have comes with like a really handy dandy platform. So figuring all of that out. And then also Atlassian has our flagship corporate conference called Team. So we are in the midst of Team 23 planning for all the community activations that we host there.
Awesome. And I just chatted everyone, but if you want to share your recent things that you are loving, feel free to drop them in the chat.
Yes. So everybody, we'd like to go over the meeting logistics. Just a few little housekeeping things. We just want to say be respectful and kind to everybody. Cameras are optional. Zoom fatigue is real. We love the discussion. So if you want to come off mute, that's like more than welcome. If you're a chat person, we're active in there as well. So we encourage that. And the session is being recorded. So if you have to drop or if you think something we talk about might be interesting to a friend, a teammate, a link will be made available at the end of the call.
Yeah, you can take a nap if you need. We all need, or just go grab coffee, maybe. Or we can do a little dance party in the middle. Cool. All right. Why does vendor management fall under community operations? I know that, some of you may differ in levels of, your community experience or your operations experience. So we wanted to just start off with a baseline in terms of, why are we as community operations people responsible for vendor management? And there's a couple of reasons for that. The first is tech stack. We, as the operations folks, manage the community tech stack, and we're usually the admins for the platforms and the tools that we as community people are using. So whether it's your community platform or your knowledge base articles, or even like support from your community programs perspective, we're usually the ones who are doing that and like implementing it and managing it. And so kind of just makes sense for us since we're already managing the tech stack. Also, we are the perfect liaison, I would say, between the community team and the community members, as well as the vendors. So we work across both teams. We're aware of what's needed. We know what bugs are happening. We're hearing feedback from community members and community team members. Focusing on that kind of like back of the house, front of the house components. We know what programs the community is working on, and we're able to kind of bring that information to our vendors, to our customer success managers, kind of in a way that is understandable from both sides. And then the last thing is cross-functional. So we work very closely with our cross-functional stakeholders with other platforms and tools. So for example, if you're working with your sales ops team on the company-wide CRM, or your email marketing team on your your marketing automation tool, and that all fits into your community tech stack as well. It just helps to be able to handle the vendor management from community, because you also have that bigger picture of like, okay, even though these aren't tools that are owned and operated by community, we still use them. And thus, having that holistic picture adds a lot of value to being able to chat with your vendors. Anything to add here, Cassie, or anybody else in terms of like your role and how you've been doing vendor management so far?
No, I just heavy on the plus one. It's definitely all relatable content, especially like the requirements of like being aware of the bugs, feature request tracking, so that even those cross function, which going into the other bar chart, tracking all those things so cross functionally you're able to communicate that and be transparent. I think is super important.
Can we also get a hand raise or something in Zoom if you currently manage vendor relationships for your community, just to kind of see how that is. Cool. All right. So what does managing a vendor relationship entail? I'm actually just going to open all of these up so we can just chat about it. Cassie, do you want to take this one first?
Yeah, sure. So these are all the buckets that I know, Tiff, you came up with this amazing visual, but like each of these buckets are pretty important to managing the vendor relationship. So for us, and the way I think we're gonna approach this slide is just really a conversation, y'all. So if you have questions in the chat or maybe feel differently or just a plus one, come off mute or in the chat. So yeah, just wanted to preface that. But I would say for me at Atlassian, a lot of our my CSM relationships are very high touch. So not only do we have like regular CSM calls bi-weekly, but we also do have like a Slack instance where we're able to chat with them real time. Obviously, if I have a feature request or I need to submit a bug, I'm not going to do that maybe like in a Slack channel. That's more of like just high level questions so that we can continue to have that ongoing communication, build that relationship. But all of those, I would say, messages or communication in that Slack channel would be just super high level and quick. But in the recurring CSM calls, in the next slide after we have this discussion, I'll give some real-time examples. But when we're having those calls, we are talking about what not only is like what is Atlassian's highest priority, but what is the vendor's highest priority, and do those line up for like a lot more of a long-term roadmap. We're also tracking, just like the agenda items for that call, regular going, and then things that are in progress, what have you. But I would say not only are the regular CSM calls super important to just building the relationship, making sure you're staying in contact and on top of all of the things, it's also really important that you're documenting what's happening in those calls for those cross-functional relationships. So anybody on my team would be able to know what I talked about on my weekly calls, what our priorities are with our vendors. So yeah, that's kind of what I want to add on that. What about you, Tiff?
Yeah, and I think for the regular recurring calls, like they don't have to be at a regular cadence. I think it will change depending on where in the stage of the relationship you are with that vendor. So like, for example, at Venafi, we used Insighted and we were working on implementing it from nothing, but we also had a migration from user voice for our ideas. And we were pretty much chatting with them every day during that implementation process and the migration process because we encountered a ton of issues. So we had regular, like bi-weekly, like 2 times a week calls during that time. And then obviously as time kind of progressed and it became, the launch turbulence kind of settled and we were getting into the groove of things, we reduced it to once a week. And then it became bi-weekly the other way, where instead of 2 times a week, it's every other week. So it's kind of dependent on where you're at. I think also if you happen to be running a big program and you need additional support. So another example is when I was at Salesforce on the community team, we implemented Bevy for our user groups. And then we also implemented Bevy Virtual Conference for some additional larger events that we were doing. And it was a brand new product. Like they hadn't done it before except for internally. We were the first ones using it. And so we were again, calling each other and texting each other every day. So I think it depends on what initiatives are happening. And that kind of also leads to kind of the road mapping of being able to show them, oh, we have these things coming up in the future. So, as a customer success manager or even like the product team, maybe be aware of that so that we might need extra support during that time. Yeah, okay. I think that was it for me on that part.
Well, yeah, no, that's actually a really good call out because like right now as we're transitioning vendors, I'm like, we're talking a lot. But I don't imagine that's going to happen after like a quarter and we're all set up, that cadence will definitely not be as recurring. Okay, so going into the next bucket, bugs and feature tracking. So we've got some points here, escalating bugs and following up on fixes, highlighting those feature requests, workarounds, and what have you. So I don't know about you, Tiff. I'm going to keep it really real, and then I'd be interested later to hear from Joe about this from the vendor side. But obviously, I'll share a visual of how we track bugs with one of our vendors, but well, I guess bug and maybe I'll separate bugs and feature tracking because I think a lot of the vendors that we use have a really easy way to submit for a bug, and those have a different maybe SLA of like fixing than, hey, I think I want to add this feature request. So I would say a lot of the vendors that we use have a really good way of up leveling those bugs and having a good SLA for them or fixing them. I would say feature tracking and up leveling feature requests to a lot of our vendors have been really problematic if we're not like opening our purse to be like, hey, we want to pay for this. Yeah, I know that's not always like a sexy thing to say, but I will say just from my experience working with vendors, like a way for them internally to track features from their overall clients or community, it isn't really always there. And so it's kind of up to me to be like kind of just beating that drum, that's the analogy of like, hey, what's the status of this, or tracking it on my own versus maybe there being a service desk or something for that. That's been my experience. What about you, Tiff?
Yeah, I'm actually curious to hear from you, Cassie. Do
Yeah,
you submit ideas in the ideas portal for your vendors, or do you just bring them up as feature requests to your CSM?
good question. The ones that have a system of us up leveling feature requests, I definitely will do that, but not all of our vendors actually have like a place to
Mhm.
actually do that, like a built out process. So Bevy, for example, if I have a feature request there, I have a million of them, I will submit it in their portal and then also upload, like keep it on our Kanban board to like bring up in the next meeting. And it stays in a column, honestly, until just so that it's top of mind, not only for me, like I don't forget about it, but for them as well.
Mhm.
But I'll say, even in my experience with the vendors that do have a nice little pretty process and a button and a ticketing system, that doesn't ever really mean that feature really goes through. And sometimes that's kind of annoying too, because if you have this built out process and you're like, hey, this is how you're supposed to do it, and we'll take a look at it, but then it never ever gets like brought up or somebody comments on the ticket, like, well, why? It'd almost be better if you didn't, because then why did I submit it? But I
Yeah.
know that that's just like a selfish problem.
No, totally. I think from my perspective, bugs and feature tracking, and I know Cassie, in the next slide, you're going to share some amazing real life things and tools and resources of what you do. But I do think that it's really important to have team wide visibility for your team as well as the vendor team in terms of all the things that are going on. So having that shared document of being able to track, when we were like, for the vendors that I work with, it's, we have like a shared spreadsheet and it has, bug feature, urgency, impact, and then like what the item is, and then, examples. I do, from my side, see, when people are messaging and you're like, oh, just submit this as a feature request, submit this as a feature request. So I personally try and abide by that. But then what I'll do is I'll submit like an idea and I'll have that URL, and then I will share it in the doc as well, and then follow up with it in my next
Yeah.
call with them. So yeah. Okay. And then also I do think like enablement, so team enablement in this bug and feature tracking is also really important. So if you're working with a community manager who has been asking for a feature or flagged a bug, giving them access to that sheet and enabling them to also directly submit things or add things in there, so that when you have your meeting with your CSM, your recurring meeting, you can bring that up, who submitted it, and then you can also follow back with them. Because at the end of the day, you're not going to have all of your community members or community team members on this call. It's likely just going to be you and a CSM. And so being able to understand what your team needs are and then bringing that to the CSM, I think is really important. Okay, road mapping.
Yes. So I think, and I know we keep saying this, but after the slide, we have two resources. One being like a template roadmap, and then two, I'm going to show you a real life example of like I said, the Kanban board that we use for one of our vendors. But before I share that template, I will say that having a community roadmap is super important, even if it's really high level and maybe you and only your community team know about it. I would definitely say share as wide and broad as you can, but at least as a start, having something that is like quarter by quarter that you can share within your team is super important. But not only internally, but having, and I've learned this, I would say the hard way, of having a visibility into a vendor roadmap. Not only is it super important, but I think just having their maybe 3 to 5 year vision of how they see their product, like, does that align with your vision for your community? That's something that now when I'm looking at a vendor, I'm like, what is your 3-year vision? And if you don't have it, at least like, do you have a timeline to give it to me? That is something that's really important to me now. But also in my experience with CSMs at certain vendors, there might be a higher turnover rate. So having those documentation, everything that you've worked on in the past is super important. Not only for the internal visibility, like we've talked about, but I think if you're onboarding a new CSM or, without having to, they're not in those conversations that you had with the previous one. So anything that you can do to help yourself to just like get them right up to speed, I think is super helpful.
Yeah, I do think that one of the things we did at Salesforce that our community members absolutely loved was we shared our public community roadmap. And it not only contained things like when programs were launching, or like, for example, like when Salesforce MVP nominations would open, or when there were certain engagement initiatives that we were doing or incentive programs or anything like that. But we had a very active community that also used our tools a lot. And so they were asking for feature requests or new things in the tools. And when a vendor came to us and was like, oh, by the way, we're doing it, put that in the publicly facing roadmap. That way they can also share in the excitement from your perspective as well. And it's kind of a really fun, operational, haha moment, when, your community members can also share joy in an operations update from, one of your vendors. That was a really, really nice moment. And they really appreciate that level of visibility too. And then, yes, I do think sharing our roadmap and being very transparent about dates. For example, again, I know we've been talking about Bevy a lot recently, but I know Cassie and I just happen to have really close relationships with our CSM at Bevy. We shared the roadmap with them in terms of even for our conferences, when does event registration open? When does it close? What is the site that it's hosted on? How are people registering? All of the details. That way they can also be better partners for us. And it's, a working relationship. I think it's not just you're expecting things from the vendor. I think the vendor also needs things from you in order to make it a successful relationship. And then one of the other things is also from a documentation standpoint, one of the things I really appreciate from vendors or CSMs when I'm working with them is if they can provide me any documentation up front, then that I can then use as a base for knowledge-based articles that I'll be writing for our community. That also helps me work faster. And then, we can also make sure that language and tone is consistent, between the two as well.
Totally. That actually makes me think my favorite CSMs are the ones who proactively will send me the product release notes or updates. In a nice, concise way where I'm like, oh, yay, I can just relay this to the community. Here are all the different things in this tool that you're using. So that it definitely is a good point.
Yeah.
Okay, last bucket, feedback and contracts. Feedback with vendors. Well, actually, first of all, I kind of want to go to contracts because that kind of feels more top of mind for me right now. Um, I don't know about y'all, but contract renewal seem like they would be the easiest thing. But I have learned from my experience, like trying to start that at maybe like 2 to 3 months before the contract is actually done, has been proven to be like more helpful than just thinking, we're just renewing everything. All of the security is gonna, like we've passed it before, we'll pass it again because every year there might be like a new law or a new privacy thing that you didn't have to account for the year before. So it might take a little bit
Mhm.
longer. So that is actually what I'm struggling with right now, which is why I'm like, this is coming top of mind for me. I cannot be trusted with the legal stuff, Samantha. That's hilarious. I shouldn't have been either, but here I am. No, I'm just kidding. Um, but
Another thing that falls into operations a lot.
right, yeah, totally, totally. Budget, management, contract renewals, all of that stuff, legal term, yeah. But I would say in terms of like feedback for vendors and members in the community, man, I sometimes it's like when I say vendors, it kind of like depersonalizes it for me because I really do look at a lot of our vendor or our CSMs as like my teammates,
Extended
even though they're
team.
not,
Yeah.
yeah, right?
Mhm.
They're maybe not me internal, but they definitely feel like teammates. Sometimes I talk to them more than the people in my org or sometimes in my team. So I would say the way that I approach feedback with them is just like the same way I would with anybody internally, just like trying to have that. I would say um, somebody had told me this one time, instead of naming it feedback, like feed forward. And I try to use that not only internally, but with my vendors as well. Like, I'm not going to wait for it to be like, oh, I have to thought about this and I have to give feedback. It's like, no, I'm just, as it's happening, I'm going to be transparent and give that like real time. I try to do that. Obviously, I'm not perfect, but yeah, that's what's coming to mind for me in this bucket, Tiff.
Nice. Cool. I think you covered it pretty much. I think, having as an operations person, I love having a pulse on feedback from both the front of the house and the back of the house, especially when it comes to, people who are in the platforms, in the tools, going through all the processes with regards to the tools every day. And so just having that open feedback loop, a way for people to submit that feedback and then like giving that back to, your CSMs and your vendors, I think is really important. And then yeah, contract renewals and budget is its own big thing. Not even like contract renewals, but just contracts in general. That is maybe a whole podcast episode on its own.
I know, truly. And to answer Samantha's question in the chat, are there any good resources for getting better at managing contracts? I would say honestly, because it varies, the process varies different. Oh my gosh, varies by like company. Like if you're an enterprise customer, your security is going to be totally different. Like all of those processes are going to be different. So I would ask your legal team of like, what are the steps? Like for us, it might be you need a supplier business case review before you even get into the data transfer impact assessment. Here I'm using all these words. But I think it, depending on the company you work for, it's going to look different on the documents that they're going to ask for, whether it be a contract or a contract renewal.
Or as a solopreneur, if you don't really have anyone, I know if you're making contracts, there are some really good template companies out there that like have very set, like if you're a consultant, there's like very good baseline consulting contracts that you can use. But not that I know of off the top of my head, like in terms of like resources for getting better at managing them. I think it's just practice. But I'm also not a solopreneur, so I don't really know. Sorry.
Sorry,
If
Samantha.
anyone has insight, add it into the chat. All right. Did you want to go over your amazing template?
Yeah, so this is just a template that Brian Oblinger had shared with me maybe a year ago. He's also a community consultant in the industry. He's amazing. So he had shared this with me, and I wanted to share it with you all. Again, we'll share like slides after. So if you don't screenshot it now, it's okay. It will be available. But I have even used this just to visually represent to my own team, like, hey, this is what I'm working on. It's just a very lightweight thing to plug and play. So I wanted to share that. And then this is my real life example of the board that I use with Bevy. We've talked about them a million times today. They should pay us, Tiffany. But this is the board that I use with them on a bi-weekly basis. And so like on the left, you'll see how to use this board. Any Trello, we use Trello for this. You could use Asana, you could use anything, honestly, any Kanban board. But just at Atlassian, I think the standard is on the left to just have a start here column. So anybody who jumps in here, like I said, because anybody on my team can have access to this board and look at it at any time and even add cards if they wanted to. But I guess just best practice is like how to use this board. So in that card, it'll tell them, exactly what we use the board for. Also the API and webhook documents, I am no developer, but we do have an internal team that works on any dev work that needs to be done on third-party platforms. So then I always have that handy right there. So I don't have to be like, where is that? Because I will never remember. But then also the Bevy release notes and press kit that has been helpful for like logos if I need to grab really quick, if I'm doing an internal presentation. But then the release notes are also helpful for me and other team members if I haven't shared them with them in whatever place. And then their Bevy fiscal year breakdown, because we've been in a relationship with them for 5 years and I still cannot remember their fiscal year. They can't remember mine either. So I have to have that there. That card is for my own my brain. So then you move into the next column and we have that prioritized backlog. So this is where we were talking about those feature requests. Anytime I submit a feature request within Bevy's own system, I'm also adding a card here so that it's top of mind for all of us and we don't forget about it. We have our bi-weekly discussion items. That's pretty self-explanatory. Like I said, if a team member can't be in one of these meetings, but they want me to rep, an item for them or ask a question, they can add that here as well. We have a follow-up column because as we all know, you can't always get to all the agenda items, and then in progress and done are also pretty self-explanatory. The only thing I'll call out here is that we do have automation. So anytime anybody adds a card here, as you see, like my name gets added there, the CSM's names gets added, and then someone on my team gets added so that any update that gets made from this card, whether somebody writes in it or they move it from like bi-weekly to in progress to done, we're all notified and in the loop of that. So yeah, just wanted to give a visual, like a real life example of how we've approached it.
Hey, Cassie.
Yeah. What's
You
that?
mentioned that you track all the feature requests that you put into the platform. Do they track it? Is there a portal that you can track it, or you usually have to keep track of it yourself?
There is a portal that I could go into, and it's like tickets I've submitted. But
Yeah.
from my experience, nobody is really like from the vendor side, like commenting on it, reaching out, asking more. It seems like it goes off into the abyss. So that's kind of why I have this prioritized backlog there too. So it's like, I don't forget about it either, because there's a lot of things coming up with them.
Yeah. Okay, cool, thanks.
Yeah, yep. And then, yeah, because this is a Cassie. No, I actually made this. This is not there. I made them do this because it just makes it easier to track. And like I said, when we go through different CSMs, it's easy for them to just jump in a ticket or I link it to them and then they can see all the information in it. So this is a Cassie special. I created
it. All right, awesome. So now to get to the star portion of the event, we'd love to bring Joe Ebner in. He is, I guess, a friend of a friend now. We were introduced through one of our mutual friends who also works at Amplitude. Joe, welcome to Community Observations. We're really happy to have you. Would you like to start off by kind of doing an introduction of yourself and kind of your role, how it's evolved? And then also, I know you wanted to talk about your previous role at Test.io as well as at Amplitude.
Yeah, totally. Thanks for having me. This has been a really cool discussion so far. And it's always interesting as a CSM to hear, customers' perspectives on working with CSMs. So it's been really great. And we also work with Insided as our provider as well. So really cool to hear. So a little background on myself. I am a customer success manager at Amplitude. I've been there for the past year and 8 months. And part of my role at Amplitude is working with our community team. So Jeremy, who we both know, I meet with him very regularly to communicate our community strategy to our customer success org and find ways for our community to actually mutually benefit CSMs taking work off their plate, and then also connecting our customers. So I think there's really a huge value add to communities that maybe some people don't recognize until they understand how other companies are taking their community vision and applying it to things like enablement and customer references. It's really synergistic process that I've been learning more about. And as you mentioned, my previous experience was at a company called Test.io, which was a community-driven business in itself. It was essentially what we call crowd testing QA. We had a network of testers around the world who would provide real feedback on their devices to mobile app developers. So, you can test for bugs in an automated check, but once you hit real network conditions on, a Samsung phone with a certain firmware version, things definitely change. So that whole process of getting users on real devices was a community management practice in itself, because you had to communicate the goals of the tests, what the end customer was looking for, and also handle perhaps bug disputes because they were paid out in the severity of the bugs they found. So really throughout my whole career in CS, I've kind of found a way to community management. So really excited to be talking to y'all right now.
Very cool. And I think you touched upon another huge topic of, just the collaboration and the partnership between CS and community within your organization. So like not you working with, a customer of Amplitude's, but internally, like making sure that your customer success managers know about the community, can talk about the community to help their customers be more successful. Knowing, I'm not sure if you've implemented Gainsight with your Insighted instance, but at Venafi, we also had, our Insighted and Gainsight and Salesforce were all connected from a tech stack perspective. So we could see, account deals when their renewals were happening, what their CSAT and NPS scores were tied into activities within the community. And it added so much more value to showing, to sales, to customer success, to even the product team, how impactful being active in the community was.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's something that we talk about like on a weekly basis. So I work in the corporate segment, which generally means that, the CSMs there have somewhat of a larger book of business, definitely compared to the enterprise space. So we're always looking for efficiencies, and we're always looking for ways to get information to customers, more quickly or more relevant in a more relevant way. And especially now, the economy, customers are really interested in what similar customers of Amplitude are doing in their space. And a lot of the time, the CSM is going to be that intermediary to let them know we're really used to seeing, X happen or Y happen. But it's so much more powerful when a customer is actually able to hear it from someone else. And people think that reference calls and references are really reserved for the sales space, where you get a new sale and you introduce a customer and they have the whole conversation with them. But I think the community is an excellent way to get that conversation happening without needing to spend time or resources on the CSM's part. And have a more authentic conversation as well. So there's a bunch of ways that we do that. Happy to dive into them or take the conversation whichever way you want to go.
Yeah, well, let's dive into that a little bit more. Tell us a little bit about it.
Yeah, totally. So what we do on our community page is we share our product updates. Cassie, I know you were talking about, you appreciate when a CSM is able to send you a collated list of updates that are really relevant. And part of the way that we do that is we have a section of our community called product updates, where we'll write a monthly update of all the features that we shipped. And every, EBR that we have or touch point that we have, we're going to be presenting a list of new, resources that we're presenting to customers, whether it's our academy or it's our community, updates to our, help center documentation, et cetera. And we encourage customers to subscribe to that list so that they can see a readout every month sent to them. And then we can pick apart which features are going to be most relevant from that list. So one of the things that I've done in like my partnership with Jeremy is figure out ways to conveniently slip in promotions for our community. And like I mentioned, like telling customers in EBRs, pulling up our community page and sharing our screen and showing them what it looks like and what it has to offer has been really valuable. And we also host webinars as well in our community. So yeah, kind of the goal of CS is to connect our customers and share their vision with our organization and get their feedback in there. And really the community has been a powerful way to do that effectively, and then also save CSM's time, particularly in our organization, because the role of a CSM at Amplitude, which is a larger company, at a smaller company, CSMs would be wearing a ton of hats and doing literally everything. But at Amplitude, we have defined departments. We have support, we have, professional services, we have an implementation team, a training team, et cetera. And what we try to do in the community is get all of the expert information from each of those departments, on threads with customers, moderating those conversations, and then having a way for us to take those conversations, package them up, and make sure they're getting to the right people, and then enable customers to join in on those conversations as well. So really, the community has been an awesome vehicle to take internal knowledge, get it out in the open, share it with customers, and kind of bring this whole feedback loop back together.
This is making me think, do you or does Amplitude have a customer advisory board too? Like with maybe some of your most impactful clients, however you measure that.
Yeah, it's a great question. I'm sure, well, we talk to our customers all the time, but I'm actually not sure if we have an official one or not. It's a really great question.
Yeah, no, I mean, I see people, not all of, I would say not a lot of the vendors that I do have, and the ones that have tried it isn't always like successful or like a long standing advisory board, because like, a few months here and then what happened to that, So just curious, but.
Yeah, no, we are trying to connect our customers more and more to each other, in the form of webinars as well, because we have very industry specific needs. And one of those in particular is gaming, because gaming customers are a lot different and have a lot different needs than, say a standard e-commerce customer or a B2B software customer. And they have questions that oftentimes go unanswered in, documentation. So we try to help them advise each other. So in that sense, just having a webinar on the community and posting about it and having users join it has been valuable. But that's what we're trying to really kick up this year, is getting industry specific webinars together, and figuring out easier ways for customers to connect. And one of those ways has been creating a Slack instance. I don't know, I'm guessing most people on this call are Slack users. If you have a Slack, there's on the left sidebar going to be an area for you to have multiple companies. So you have like a shared like Amplitude Slack, a shared Insided Slack, etc. But we're going to have a community Slack where essentially it's going to be its own instance with its own channels, and customers are going to be able to post things like product feedback, super relevant in the conversation we were just having, post questions related to certain topics, and just kind of have like a more natural conversation in Slack and be able to DM each other, which is something that our community platform from Insided isn't really capable of doing. So we're trying that out.
Yeah, I'm just like, this isn't on my like questions to ask, but now that you said that, I'm like, wait, hold on. Is that like, is any of your customers going to be able to go into Slack, or is that like your most engaged customers? Because I'm like, oh yeah, that's like another little community there.
Yeah, so we're just starting it out. This is a very recent development, and we're starting it out with our most engaged customers.
Okay, cool.
So people have shown interest in the original community, like our top posters are in there right now. But one of the like value adds that I'm offering to my customers is that feature update section. A lot of them are Slack enabled companies. They don't like using email, and we've been sending those product updates via email. So like the foot in the door that I've been offering is, hey, if you want those product updates to be sent to you monthly over Slack, let me know and I'll add you. And that's kind of how we've been getting our foot in the door, because once they're in that channel, they're in the whole Amplitude community and they're exposed there.
I love that. That's a really good value add, especially for those engaged users. You're like, oh, I have direct access to this team.
Yeah.
Cool.
Cool. So kind of switching gears a little bit, I would love, and do you currently have customers who you're working with, Joe, or do you manage CSMs?
I'm a individual contributor, so I'm working with customers directly. Yeah.
Gotcha. And then kind of on a regular basis, like how many customers do you have in your, is it a portfolio at any time or in your Rolodex? I don't know. You know what I'm trying to ask.
Yes. Yeah, portfolio. Maybe if it was like 1990, it would be the Rolodex, but
Right. I just aged myself. Okay, cool.
So yeah, I have 45 customers
Oh
around.
my gosh.
Yeah, and it kind of bounces between high 30s, high 50s, depending on the situation here. So that's part of why it's been really important to scale these processes. And community is definitely not the only thing that we're doing. But oftentimes I feel like with any project, teams can feel like it's cumbersome, like, why am I doing this? But I think one thing we've done a really good job at Amplitude is using the community to help CSMs do their job more easily. And I think that's really important when trying to spread community in an organization. Because back to my last job, the community was a necessity. You needed to communicate with testers because they're doing these tests, they're getting paid in the severity of the bug. And there were often disputes where a tester would find the same bug like 2 minutes after someone else submitted it, and they're going to be, typing and texting to you. And it can be kind of a time suck. And that's where our community manager would come in and he would handle that interaction. But if a CSM wanted to ask a question to the community and say, hey, testers, have you ever encountered a bug like this before on mobile where, X, Y, and Z is happening? Then they're able to have that conversation as an intermediary. And at Amplitude, like, we're able to refer our customers back to each other in there. So it's been a real value add. And I think the creative ways that our community team has come up to actually save CSM's time and get word out about certain webinars we're doing has been really valuable.
Yeah, absolutely. Curious to also hear from that. I did not expect that many customers in your Rolodex portfolio smartwatch. It sounds like we're creating for like, I imagined it be like 10. So I guess, like, how do you, like, if each of your customers had a Cassie board, a Cassie Trello board, like, is that something that happens, or like, how do you manage it all?
Yeah, great question. Lots of ways. There's a lot to do, and sometimes it can feel overwhelming, but it does have to be done. And part of the way that I manage my customers' goals is I create what's called a success plan, which I'm sure if you've worked with a CSM before, they've made some version of it. But I try to keep my processes pretty automated and pretty regulated across customers, where I'll have a meeting and we'll have a running deck. And every time that we meet on like a monthly basis or something, we're going to update that deck with your most relevant goals. But before that, we're going to take a look at the end goals from the last meeting, highlight them, green, yellow, red, add to them, subtract from them. And on each one, we try to keep track of, is this a time-bound goal? When is this due? Who's in charge of it? What is the goal? And what is it going to accomplish? And I just edit those slides live in front of the customer so that we're having a conversation about it as well. And it kind of, gets two goals done at once, of having a conversation about goals and then just getting the work done. So I don't have to do homework and go back and edit that success plan. Like, I make it look pretty, obviously, and then I'll highlight it and I'll, log it in Salesforce or whatever. But really our Cassie board is the recurring slides that we meet and agree upon. And then I save them somewhere where I can document them. And then on follow-up emails, I'll take a screenshot of that and send it to them so that it's pretty much, one of the first things they see when they open the email. It's our goals. and color coded where they're at. And when you have 45 customers, sometimes you don't have the luxury of, building out a phenomenal Trello board, like the one Cassia showed us. But if you're an enterprise CSM, it's definitely different. You have that, more time to work with a larger book of customers and get more in depth. But the goal here is to have quality conversations, set quality goals, and then have systems to get people what they need at scale. And when we do need to spend extra time, and when we do need to drill down, and we do need a personal human touch to have a deeper conversation, we have time to do that with the right customers in the right situations, because we've automated the right tools. And it's not perfect. It's not perfect. That's, I'm not saying we have a perfect solution for everything. But that's where we're moving towards.
Very cool. It is interesting because I feel like, we, from the community team, the ops perspective, we are also managing, I mean, obviously not 40 different vendors, but we, for a while there, I think I was having 6 various CSM meetings a week, and it definitely adds up, which is why I think tech stack management is such a big part of a community operations role. But none of the CSMs created a slide or a Trello board or a document or anything like that. It was more they just hop on the call and they're like, oh, so what's up? What do you need help with? How's it going? And so for me, it was oh my gosh, I need something to organize, which is why we created, a Cassie board type thing, or a spreadsheet or a shared document. And so I guess I didn't really have a question there, but more just it's refreshing to hear that you, from a CSM perspective, also you want something organized, and even though it's not necessarily an automated process, it's something that still adds a lot of value for the customers.
Yeah. And do they, Joe, question for you, does the customer have the opportunity to edit that slide? Is it the same link every time so that they can go in and add their agenda items, or is it kind of one way or a two-way street with that slide?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I have not created a shared document. I've been thinking about it for a while. But I try to get the conversation going on the call so I can X out of the full screen mode and type on it. And basically, I guess I am the mediator between that, but I would definitely consider doing a shared document. And I think that's a really great idea. But essentially, does the customer have say in it? Yes. And it's so important for me to, because my whole job, really, if you boil down to it, is to make sure the customer is reaching their goals. And no one likes to have someone barge in and tell them here are my goals for you based on what I'm seeing. It's so much you want them to have their own goals, and you want to help them meet them, which is why I've been throwing around the idea of actually making a shared doc, which I probably should. But unfortunately, for the time being, it's been very manual. That's a really great idea.
Yeah, no, I will say, if you don't have the time to create a Cassie board, is how we're branding this. A lot of, a V1 is usually the Google Docs with, or Google Sheets actually. And then within each field or whatever, we've got our thing. But I will say from from my perspective as the customer, it's really nice that let's say I have a meeting. I know our meeting is on Thursday, but I just came out of a team meeting on Tuesday, and they had really good ideas, and I'm like, oh, let me add that to the agenda for later. I'll think about this later. Just from my own selfish perspective of I don't always think of things. I like to thank my past self, I should say. I'm like, oh yeah, thanks for thinking about that. And I had somewhere to put it.
Yes. Yeah,
Definitely.
That's definitely something I want to incorporate into my process moving forward. And there's been an operational gap there that I think would be way easier to solve for, and just giving customers access. So totally.
Well, you're in the right place for operational stuff. Look at that.
Yeah.
I have Tiffany, I know we have a few minutes left. Did you want to ask another one, or?
Yeah, Venia, do you want to come off mute? I'm calling you on the spot and ask your question, and then we have a couple announcements to make, and we want to be mindful of everyone's time. So.
Sure. Yeah, and I also have a client meeting in 6 minutes, but One of the main concerns and struggles that I've had a lot with a lot of my vending contributors is that fairly frequently I want to be quite close to my data, right? I want to be a part of the data operations in addition to the community operations. But oftentimes IT, data analyst flows, server maintenance, OSPO offices, all of them want to segregate their meetings so that they have a lot more time to go into the weeds and speak with individuals about technical implementations more. And I find that simply by virtue of my role in community operations, I'm often removed from that step. Is that something that you recommend, that we leave those meetings alone, or should we be fighting for inclusion in those meeting spaces?
Meetings where data is being aggregated on your use.
Yeah, where IT is putting together the data flow schema, for instance.
Got it. You know, that is a great question. And I think that there's a balance, right? There's a balance where you need to be involved and know what's going on with your data and have a say in what's being reflected, but also preserving your own time for things that are mission critical and kind of knowing where that delineation, like delegation point is going to exist. But I always definitely lean on the side of, you know, if you're working with someone, it sounds like IT internally, like you're speaking of your internal IT team versus the reporting your provider's giving you. Is that kind of the distinction here?
Yeah.
I think it would be good to just communicate that to you know, the vendor and maybe have them work directly with your IT team, because we all have our own set of reporting metrics that we're getting data from. And I have walked into situations before where we will show metrics that we're collecting and they do not match at all subjectively what, you know, the customer is seeing. And I think just like connecting those two dots there might help to understand if there's like any discrepancies. So maybe getting involved there in like getting in the weeds is a little time consuming, but connecting, I think, your you know, vendor to your IT team could be super valuable, and it's something that I guarantee the vendor would be happy to be involved in, because they want to make sure that they're more aware of your situation. And it's definitely something that we've done before as well.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks.
Very cool. All right. We have 3 minutes left. So wanted to do a couple quick announcements. Starting next month, we are switching off of Luma. They're deprecating their communities, and so we're moving to Talkbase. Surprise, surprise. So please stay tuned for comms and a link to join our new community home for our next meeting. And then the second one is we would love to just get some feedback. It looks like we have some first timers to our meeting and some recurring people who are coming back to observations, but we want to just do a check-in, pulse check to see if people are still enjoying these meetups. I loved this conversation today, but when you get it, please take some time to fill it out. It'll just be one question. And then lastly, we wanted to share, excuse me, the meeting for next time. It's going to be red flags. So when community operations saved the community. So it could be automation to keep up with growth, it could be notification triggers, it could be reporting insights, just anything kind of in a day-to-day operations where you're like, oh my gosh, there's something going on within the community and it helps save the community time, money, or trust, which is really important for communities. So if you have a story to share or would like to be questioned by Cassie and I, or have a presentation, please feel free to email us. And then lastly, just want to send a huge thank you to Joe. This was such a good conversation. I think we could have probably gone on for another hour. We didn't even touch our questions. So, but thank you. It was great meeting you, and such good insight.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Joe. And thank you all for attending. It looks like we have a few first timers. So yay, that's always exciting. But we'll see
Yay.
you all next time. And like Tiff said, keep an eye out for that survey. Everyone have a good rest of your day, morning, afternoon, wherever you are in the world. Bye.
See ya.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Bye.